Somebody has FSR 4 frame generation working on RDNA 3 on Linux. More on that in a minute. We got tons of other stories to talk about today. Honestly, sometimes I try to read through them all at the start, but we're just going to click quickly because, my goodness, there's so much to talk about. Now, some of it's how bad the RAM situation is. We got people trying to grow their own. But before you do that, check out Jawa.gg. There's tons of great user reviews here. PC Marketplace, if you're unaware of this, you can sell pre-built systems, buy pre-built systems, individual components, all sorts of stuff. And being a used market, a lot of these components were originally sourced before things went completely insane. So seriously, start by checking here. There are great holiday deals available. You can get entire pre-built systems. You can find exactly what you're looking for with their PC Finder by targeting performance in specific games at specific resolutions or specific components, certain price points that you want to hit. You can shop by theme to make sure it matches your room. And you can fund your upgrade by turning your gear into extra cash. You can go a couple of routes here at Jawa. You can become a Jawa seller. It can even be a side business, set your own prices, maximum flexibility there. But you can also take the maximum convenience option and click this get an instant offer button and sell your GPU or CPU directly to Jawa, getting an instant offer today. Now, there's tons of great user reviews, and there's a bunch of great stuff available here. And best of all, I can get you $10 off your first purchase using code OWEN10. Again, please check out Jawa here. Huge thank you to them for sponsoring today's video. Before you go out into some of the insanity that we're seeing out there on pricing. Now, let's come back around to this. FSR 4 frame gen working on RDNA 3 through the same FP8 emulation path used for the upscaler. Now, it's important to note that this is not the same thing as the int8 version of FSR 4 upscaling that some of you may be aware of. So I've reported on this and tested it on my channel a little while back. AMD had seemingly accidentally released code for a version of FSR 4 upscaling that was compatible with RDNA 3 and RDNA 2 GPUs that ran on int8 instead of FP8, had a little bit of a penalty to image quality and performance. And a lot of people had hoped that would be part of the FSR Redstone release, but we didn't get that. But this is not that. That's important to note here. So remember, with the FSR Redstone update, we got a bunch of new features for RDNA 4, none of it compatible with RDNA 3. And the main new one on that big December 10th update was the frame generation, which showed improved image quality for the generated frames at similar levels of performance, meaning getting a similar number of generated frames. The performance cost was similar to the older version, but again was exclusive to RDNA 4. Now, what this is talking about with this FP8 emulation path is that in Linux, there is a optional ability to emulate the FP8 instructions, but using a WMMA version which runs on RDNA 3. So RDNA 3 has some machine learning performance available that, like RDNA 2, for example, didn't with WMMA. Now, it's nothing near what RDNA 4 is capable of. And so that's kind of the reason it seems that AMD is targeting RDNA 4 is it has more machine learning performance available there. But it's not that RDNA 3 didn't have anything. So what Linux is allowing is these FP8 instructions, which are on work for RDNA 4, can be emulated. At least that's my understanding. Again, I want to be clear. A lot of this is kind of over my pay grade, but I've read into this. That's how I'm understanding it. All my sources will be linked in the video description. So they can emulate the FP8 instructions through the WMMA, and there is a performance cost to this. But overall, what is being claimed here is then through Optiscaler to expose the choice of whether you're using the FSR 3 or the FSR 4 frame generation. You can combine that with Linux's ability to emulate the FP8 instructions, and you can then run the machine learning-based frame gen on the RDNA 3 GPU. Now, they do mention here that on a 7800 XT, running the latest version of FSR3 frame generation, 3.1.6, it can generate frames in 0.07 milliseconds, whereas using the FSR 4.0.0 machine learning based frame generation, it took 0.13 milliseconds, so about double the frame generation time. So there is a penalty there. Whereas in my testing on RDNA 4 with the official release, I saw that the newer frame generation generated just as many frames as the old one in the same amount of time, meaning they seem to have about the same performance cost. So what this seems to be saying is that running some version of a machine learning based frame generation on RDNA 3 using its WMMA instructions should theoretically be feasible here. But again, is it going to perform quickly enough to be worth it? I mean, I don't see any problem with giving the option to people. And that's what I think a lot of people want. Because again, the int 8 version of the FSR 4 upscaling didn't look or run quite as good as the FP8 version on RDNA 4 when you were running on RDNA 3 or RDNA 2 GPUs. But it was better than the non-machine learning based version, at least in image quality wise. So I think AMD could win a lot of, internet points for just, brand loyalty and people just being happy with what they're doing here if they would just make some option of running some potentially slightly degraded version or running something that, doesn't run as well on the older GPUs, pop up some kind of warning, but just give them a driver toggle that says, okay, you can run a machine learning based version on RDNA 3. Maybe it doesn't run as well, use at your own risk, etc. But if they would just expose the option, I think you would have a lot of people happy with having that option. Anyway, so this is kind of a somewhat proof of concept that even running through an emulation layer, it's not completely out of the question to be running this on RDNA 3, which again does have some amount of machine learning based acceleration available to it. Now, another big news story is that there is apparently a critical motherboard flaw that allows gaming cheats. Riot discovered this, and they've now blocked Valorant, and I would assume also League of Legends players that don't update the BIOS on affected motherboards. And there have been security patches pushed live by all major motherboard vendors. So the basic idea on this is that when a PC first starts up, there is a security feature that stops like modification of memory from like a local device. So this kind of cheat they're talking about here is actually like plugging a physical device into your motherboard to then directly access the memory. And then manipulate the memory, which again, in the game running in the memory, you can then manipulate that and run cheats. And this would be something that would be pretty much impossible to detect and stop once it's already running. So the idea is that they need to stop this from happening when the PC boots. But apparently the motherboard flaw, as I understand it, was causing that like memory protection feature to trigger too late so that these devices could access memory before the protection for that kicked on. And again, there's motherboard updates that, fix that. But that's kind of where the issue is coming from. So now you're going to have a bunch of users having to update their BIOS to be able to play games protected with Riot's anti-cheat. And in general, just, man, I wish the cheating market on PC wasn't like, I have never understood the whole mindset behind like PC cheats. For me, like in competitive gaming and ranking systems, everything like that, the fun was always measuring my improvement, and that was the fun. So having a number go up, which its sole purpose is like measuring my effectiveness, and then just cheating to make that number go up, just to me just seems entirely pointless, but cheats are a huge market, and this seems to be more of a niche thing since it relies on, to my understanding, a hardware level cheat, which would be a lot more expensive and complicated to do than just downloading, cheats from some cheat website. But anyway, now another thing that is not currently being talked about as a cheat because currently it's not good enough to function as a cheat, but it crossed my mind when reading this headline that, is this potentially a place cheats could go? Is what about AI models that just learn how to play a game for you? In other words, they actually run the controller for the game based on vision. Like they literally just see the screen and then control the game. And that is an AI model that is actually up and running here. We have Nitrogen, which is an open source AI model that can play over 1,000 games for you. Now, when I've looked at video footage of this, I wouldn't say that they actually seem good enough at playing these games that we have anything to be concerned about right now. But it's certainly interesting how they're doing it. So to train AI like this, you need a whole bunch of data to train on. So what kind of data could they have? So there's a bunch of videos out there on the internet of people playing games, and when they play the game, they actually show the controller input on the screen. So you can see what button is being pressed when the game is, as the game is being played. So through a bunch of work, that can be turned into a data set where an AI model can be trained on what buttons to press when playing a game. And that's the general idea behind this. And then there's some screenshots of, the autonomous agent playing various games and having learned what buttons to press at what time. And again, to be clear, this is not AI interacting with the game code. This is an AI kind of playing the game sort of the way a human does, right? It is literally just seeing the visual feedback of the game. It's not interacting with the game on a code-based level. And then it is deciding what button to press based on what it sees. So the AI actually kind of learning to play a game in some sense like that. Now, again, right now, I don't think this seems very good at it. But can you imagine a future, whoever knows how many years from now, where something like this could have been trained on tons of, competitive gaming situations and is now very good at aiming headshots and shooting, etc. So, I don't know. I'm just kind of wondering, again, it's not being presented in that context, but I'm kind of wondering if we'll have to worry about a future where AI could be playing competitive games for people by just reading the screen and running the controller, similar to the way a human would do. I don't know, guys. We're just entering a very strange world, and a lot of people don't like it. So in my last video, I talked about all the pushback that Mozilla was getting after talking about Firefox becoming an AI browser for their future. So some Firefox developers are trying to regain some user trust by explaining they do plan on having what they're at least internally calling a kill switch for AI, although that might not be the official branding, where you can just turn it off. So you can just click a button and no more AI in the browser. It removes all of those features. So anyway, there's that. Now, another place we were seeing a bunch of pushback was Microsoft's Copilot being added to LG smart TVs. And a lot of people are just like, I don't want this. Well, LG is now saying that Copilot can be deleted on webOS TVs after backlash. Now, apparently, we have Microsoft devoting all these resources towards Copilot and AI. And then they've also talked about basically admitting a lot of people don't seem to actually be wanting or using that. Meanwhile, you can't do basic features that you could do on Windows 10. For example, like move your taskbar from the bottom of the screen to the side or the top, which was something you could do on Windows 10. But Microsoft has explained that because in Windows 11, they completely recoded the taskbar with new code base, you couldn't just use the Windows 10 code base to allow those features. So it would be a huge development process that they just can't possibly devote the resources to. There's too many other priorities. Like adding in a bunch of AI features that nobody wants or uses and making them available on LG smart TVs. Anyway, let's talk about the RAM apocalypse. So G.Skill has released a statement on the sharp rise in memory prices since Q4 of 2025, finding this here at Tech Power Up. Again, all my sources will be linked in the video description. They're saying basically that because DRAM prices are insane, their prices are going to be changing constantly without notice. Thanks. Anyway, now I do want to mention, because I do think that some people who buy PC components don't fully understand how RAM works. Like, G.Skill doesn't manufacture DDR5. There's really kind of three companies that do that: SK Hynix, Samsung, and Micron. But the branded RAM modules that you put in your PC from companies like G.Skill and others, they secure the actual RAM chips, the DDR5 chips, from those suppliers. And so they have to pay whatever they have to pay to get it. So in other words, really don't necessarily blame G.Skill if prices go insane. Now, I'm not saying that they won't have their own additional markup, and so maybe there is stuff to blame there, but I'm just saying it's not entirely on them to set the pricing of their own components, bill of materials for putting together this stick that they then sell to you. It all gets pretty complicated, so you can always try growing your own RAM, as some Redditors have apparently started to resorting to. Now, because of all of the RAM stuff, we've been seeing continued reports, but always these kind of leaks and rumors, not really official statements from AMD or NVIDIA on what might happen to the GPU market due to this RAM becoming more expensive, because that adds on to the cost. And, if somebody like NVIDIA can get a certain amount of RAM and they could sell it at crazy prices on data center, do they want to keep allocating it if it's in short supply to their gaming division? Well, we've got two different 5060 Ti's. One's 8 gigabyte, one's 16 gigabyte. Does it still make sense to allocate as much GDR7 supply to the 16 gigabyte 5060 Ti? Now, found this here at videocards.com. They're getting it from board channels. None of this is, official statements. But it's interesting that they're talking about the 5060 Ti series product strategy maybe being adjusted to focus on the 8 gigabyte version rather than the 16 gigabyte version. And they're talking about transferring the market position of the original 16 gigabyte version to the RTX 5070 series. Now, this is interesting because if we're talking RAM prices, the 5070 uses 12 instead of 16. So that is less. So it is, from a total dollar amount perspective, less affected than the 16 gigabyte 5060 Ti if these prices go up and supply goes down. But the 5070 is generally a more expensive graphics card. Now, interestingly, while it's supposed to be a $550 graphics card, when we were getting to around Black Friday, I was seeing some getting listed for less than $500. So there certainly has been at least some models pretty heavily discounted in the past. And so if they're talking about transferring the market positioning, now that doesn't necessarily say reducing the pricing to where the 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte previously set. That's maybe one way you could interpret this. Another way you could interpret, though, is that everything else will go up in price, and maybe the 5070 would just not go up as much. And then so on more of just like a line up the pricing from least to greatest and look at it kind of proportionally related to each other, maybe it just kind of fits into that slot. So not sure what to make of that. I mean, if this did mean the 5070 became more affordable relative to other GPUs, it could certainly make it more interesting. And that could be the small silver lining in it only having 12 gigabytes of VRAM. But again, I don't want to read too much into any of this since none of it is official anyway. We'll need to keep an eye on all of these things as we get into 2026 and see what really happens. Now, is it possible that we'll end up having China take over and give us affordable options in the GPU space? Well, remember that there has been more threads out there making Chinese domestic GPUs. Now, there's been lots of talk on, how much intellectual property may or may not have been originally obtained in questionable ways. But anyway, the point is that they are making progress. Their initial GPUs could run some games, but usually with some pretty serious issues, only on very specific motherboards, only very specific games. And in general, as we've seen from even huge companies like Intel, who already had drivers for their integrated graphics for many, many years, the software side of things, getting it all to be compatible with a bunch of games can be one of the hardest things. So More Threads is claiming 15 times higher gaming performance and 50 times faster ray tracing with its new architecture. Now, part of that probably is the actual hardware itself, but I would imagine a lot of this is also in the software level, where it's really hard to get not only just full support with the DX12 specs, with the API, but again, a lot of games don't super play nicely with that. That's why you get all these game optimized drivers from AMD and NVIDIA and Intel now and all of that, because just because your graphics driver is technically compatible doesn't mean the game actually plays nice with it. Anyway, so this is just something to keep an eye on, is what is going to happen here. People are also keeping an eye on whether, are we going to get Chinese RAM manufacturers starting to come in and fill in the RAM supply, etc. So just something to keep an eye on this space, because there's certainly signs that China is trying to really ramp up their chip production, their software stack around it. And so it's potentially on, you have to look at the trend lines on what direction things are going for the future. Anyway, now speaking of trend lines and the direction things are going, physical video game and hardware sales in November in the US were the worst they've been since November of 1995. How is that for a headline? So the pricing of everything right now is certainly seeming to impact sales volume. So if you look at this, now it is important to note that this is average sale price is the orangish line we're seeing here. So average selling price for US video game hardware. And we're tracking back to 1995 and up here. And then the blue bars are total hardware units sold in millions. It is important to note the orange line for average selling price is not adjusted for inflation, and this information is coming from Circana Retail Tracking Service. Now, what we're seeing here, though, is a pretty clear trend line, which is as the average selling price is trending up to unprecedented levels, the total hardware units sold is trending down in unprecedented levels, and there clearly seems to be an inverse relationship between average selling price goes up, total hardware units sold goes down. It's also incredibly weird to be seeing the average selling price for consoles to go up as the console generation continues, because a more typical thing to happen is for a game console to launch at a certain price and then to slowly get price cuts throughout the generation's life cycle. But that's not what we're seeing. What we're instead seeing, especially with Xbox, but even a bit with PlayStation, is prices have gone up and up and up since launch. it's kind of crazy, and we're seeing that the hardware sales are certainly not seeming to respond well to this situation. Now, that being said, though, while the hardware sales are down, it does look like the overall gaming market, so talking, game sales, software, etc., is actually looking to still break records with $197 billion in 2025. And also interesting, PC revenue almost tying consoles. So this information is coming from Newzoo, and they've been tracking this over time. So we're looking... so what you're looking at here is that the dark blue is mobile. The kind of teal sort of color here is console, and the dark green is PC, and then we're seeing this by year, 2022, 2023, et cetera. So what we're looking at is the total dollars value for the market. So gaming is continuing to increase. And then you can also see how the market share in that dollar figure, changes between console, mobile, and PC. Now you can see that mobile is over half of the overall market, but you can see that in 2022, console was 25%, PC was 20%. But then we saw that in 2023, PC moved to 21%. 2024, it was still at 21%. And 2025, now some of this is still relying on a bit of a projection, but they're looking at 22% versus 23% for console. And now notice that the rest of this chart is projections for the future. So we'll have to see what really happens, but Newzoo is at least projecting that by 2028, we may see PC tied with consoles. And it's certainly interesting. And it is also interesting that we're continuing to see growth here despite the insane drop-off in console hardware sales. And now one thing to think about here, though, is that this is, dollars of sales. So it's possible that, things are getting more expensive, so more money is being spent, but people aren't necessarily getting more for their money. So that's certainly something to think of. Now, another thing showing signs that gaming isn't dying out is the Game Awards just happened, and the 2025 version has broken records with 171 million live views. And as trending over time, the show does seem to be growing pretty significantly, going from in 2018, jumping to 26.2 million after beginning in 2014 with only 1.9 million. 2020 jumped to 83 million, and now we're seeing 2025 jumping again over last year. Anyway, so it's a pretty big, interest here, 171 million. That's live views, not even counting the after-the-fact views or people watching the trailers, etc. Now, the big winner at the Game Awards was definitely Clair Obscur Expedition 33, and the developers have some interesting advice for other developers. And they're saying that one of the most important things to do, or the most important thing is to delete things. In other words, they're talking about the fact that maybe a lot of games are adding too much stuff at the cost of the maybe average quality of the stuff being lower. And this is something I wanted to highlight because it's certainly something that I'm feeling in a lot of the games that I play, is that let's say you have a game that has 100 hours of content, but a lot of it seems like kind of low quality placeholder stuff. And then maybe there's some really good stuff in there. There's some 10 out of 10 content in there, but there's a lot of 6 out of 10 content in there. And then my overall feeling after playing the game might be that this game's like a 6 out of 10 or a 7 out of 10, but it had some really good elements. Now, obviously, a lot of that stuff's optional. You could just avoid it. But another option for a game developer could be to not spend a bunch of time filling in a bunch of 6 out of 10 content to make the game gigantic. What if instead you focus on what you have the time and resources to polish to be 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 content and just ship that. Expedition 33 is not an incredibly long game. It's not incredibly short, but like as RPGs go, oftentimes they'll go over 100 hours. This is certainly not a 100-hour game. I mean, you could play it multiple times and you could certainly spend that much time in the game. But what was here felt high quality. And so I overall felt my experience with the game was great. Whereas I might play other games that had some stuff in it that's just as good as what's here, but a bunch of stuff in it that just wasn't. Speaking of low quality junk, Call of Duty Black Ops 7 price already drops 40 to 50% month after launch. Interesting to note. And also, when we're looking back at some of these game stats for game sales, etc., it's going to be really interesting to track Call of Duty Black Ops 7 because all signs point to it not selling super well compared to, compared to the average game, probably selling super well. Compared to Call of Duty numbers, maybe not. It'll be interesting to see if Battlefield 6 continues to hold the number one position year to date for top selling games in 2025. Because it would be really interesting if Call of Duty is not the number one first-person shooter for the year. Interesting stuff here. Again, this coming from Circana research on those game sales numbers. Now, with the crazy pricing for anything, another interesting headline is that a lot of people seem to be flocking to older DDR4-based platforms and shelling out big money for the top-end CPUs on that, like the 5800X3D, because, well, DDR4 pricing is going up as well. It's maybe not to the same crazy levels that we're seeing on DDR5. So just an interesting thing to note. I've even seen a lot of people going online and commenting, begging AMD to start reproducing new 5800X3Ds. And it's certainly interesting, although, deals for production with TSMC, I know need to be negotiated like years in advance, so I'm not quite sure how much flexibility there is to respond in the moment to these types of things, but it would certainly be interesting because you kind of wonder if you could get some DDR4-based chips that still have pretty competitive performance like the 5800X3D out there, what that would do. But then again, if people start buying up all the DDR4 because that started happening, then maybe those prices just go insane too. So I don't know. Speaking of the insane pricing on RAM, Samsung is investigating whether employees accepted kickbacks for memory orders. So on top of all of this, there's now the question of how much corruption could be involved in if there's limited supply. How does your business get access to that supply? And do you know the right person who you could give some gifts to to make sure that your company gets that deal? Now, potentially related to this, although it's the exact reasoning is unclear, we see that the Steam Deck LCD production is ending. Valve's lowest priced version is no longer going to be as wonderfully priced. So there was a nice sale on the lower priced console kind of over Black Friday, etc. And with that note, we are phasing out the Steam Deck LCD 256 gigabyte model. Once sold out, it will no longer be available. We will continue to provide support for Steam Deck LCD on an ongoing basis. So there's no reason given for why that is, but it's possible that their margins on these were razor thin, and if RAM prices go up too much, maybe they could no longer hit those price targets, because Valve has explicitly stated that they don't sell at a loss. So, anyway, there's that. Now, if you're looking for other SteamOS devices, maybe one that's more powerful hardware spec than the Steam Deck itself, Lenovo is reportedly planning a SteamOS Legion Go Gen2 for CES 2026 that will be powered by the Ryzen Z2 Extreme. So keep your eye on that. This seems to be kind of more in the leaks and rumors side of things rather than necessarily completely officially confirmed, but this would completely make sense. So I would expect this to be the case. Now, with all of this craziness going on, we have Taiwan considering TSMC export ban that would prevent manufacturing its newest chip nodes in the US, limit exports to 2 generations behind leading edge nodes, could slow down US expansion. I believe currently they're on an N1 system where they want production outside of Taiwan to be 1 node behind, but they're looking at moving to 2 nodes behind. So yeah, with all of this chip production drama, everything, I do have to keep an eye on what's going on with Chinese domestic production and seeing if they catch up. Because there's been another breaking story about China making massive advancements in their EUV machine situation. Because a huge part of who is able to manufacture the most advanced semiconductors, it comes down to lithography machines that are pretty much monopolized by ASML for the most advanced versions. So like even TSMC has to get these from ASML. Now, China has apparently been getting former ASML engineers, and this feels like very like spy movie style, like getting them fake names and getting them into China and trying to, reverse engineer the products for China to be able to produce these. Anyway, whatever you think about this whole situation, it is very clear that China is extremely serious about ramping up its chip production to the point of poaching ASML employees, former engineers, and getting their EUV machines to a level they were unable to reach before. However, reading into this, it does not look like it's currently actually ready to scale high-yield production, but it has made major advancements compared to what they thought they'd be doing, what people thought they'd be able to do at this point. So it's happening. Now, on the VR side of things, if you follow this space, you may have been aware that Meta had announced their Horizon OS would be having a push towards third-party headsets. There had been names dropped like Asus and Lenovo, but Meta is now announcing that they are pausing third-party headset program for Horizon OS. So just throwing that out there if you'd been following that, that is now paused. And I'll also throw in as a last little note that Steam client update on December 19th has moved it to a 64-bit model on Windows 11. Now, this isn't probably going to cause a lot of people issues. There's not a lot of people still running 32-bit operating systems. So I think this is overall probably a good thing, especially in my mind, I think, for Linux, because I think a lot of Linux distros that wanted to go completely 64-bit, one of the few 32-bit things that was giving them problems was Steam. So I think this is probably a good thing, but again, some of the details on Linux and all that might be a little over my head. That's my understanding of the situation. Don't forget to check out jawa.gg in the video description. Again, great holiday deals, PCs. Try to avoid some of the crazy stuff going out in the market right now. Sell your own hardware there for that extra cash. Again, huge thank you for them sponsoring today's video. I hope all of you have an excellent day.